Hello, I'm Bjorn and I do movies, and welcome back to the House of Mysteries, because today we're doing the first act of our Justice League Dark movie. I've been really excited for this one. I've been building up to it for a while. Just a warning to people who are new, there is a video before this where I introduce the characters. It's not mandatory, but it might help with some context. In addition, if you're really new to my channel, this does have continuity with some Suicide Squad sequels I wrote. A few characters that appear in this first appeared there, and a lot of the context of their general character will be from those movies. So if you are okay with that, you can watch this and just try to piece together some of the stuff that happened in those movies, or you can go watch those and come back here whenever you're finished. There's a lot of them, honestly. I'm sorry, guys. This is the problem with continuity. But otherwise, you can just enjoy this. So if you're confused as to why I'm not really introducing certain characters, that's the reason why. They were previously introduced. Alright, I'm really excited to share this script with y'all. It's very different tonally than some of the stuff I've gone before, and real fast I'd like to go over some of the themes I plan to explore with this movie going forward. I always try to set up a theme in my movies, and sometimes I have greater success at achieving it than other times. The theme for this movie is one I've sort of explored before. It's a theme that I really like and engage with, and studying a lot of the characters of Justice League Dark I'm going to focus on, namely Dr. Mist and John Constantine. I realized that a lot of them have some things in common with each other. Grief, struggle, and regret. And that's really the theme of my movie, is grief, dealing with death, and allowing oneself to move on. And I heavily explore those themes in this movie. So without further ado, let's get into the script.
We open on the DC Warner Brothers logos as the song Strange Magic by ELO plays. From there we cut to a cross hanging from an old church. The camera moves down until we can see two closed coffins. We pull back and see a 13-year-old boy sitting in the audience. Tears flow from his eyes as he stares blankly at the coffins. The rest of the room is empty except for a priest in the back. No one else came to the funeral. We see the priest slowly approach the boy. When he reaches him, he puts a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, John. Loss can be unbearable. You may find yourself asking why without an answer. But God works in mysterious ways. He lays out a path for each of his children. Though you might not see the journey he wants you to walk yet, he knows you'll be happier once you reach your destination." The boy says nothing. He just looks at his hand. We see a bandage wrapped around his right hand. The priest nods, as if in understanding, and says, "There's a woman here to see you. She's with the government. Would that be all right?" The boy just nods his head. The priest says, "All right, son." He walks away, and we see him briefly talk to a woman in a suit. She smiles and puts a hand on the priest's shoulder. She makes her way over to the boy. She says, "John Constantine. I'm Amelia Briggs. I'm with Child Services." John doesn't look at her or say anything. She says, "Look, John, I know this is hard to discuss, but your parents didn't leave a next of kin. You don't have any immediate family. We don't have another option. We're going to have to put you in an orphanage. Now, I know that's frightening, but there are good people who can help." John says, "Kids my age never leave orphanages. I'm not daft, you know." Amila says, "There are good people out there, John. Now, they might not be blood, but someone out there wants you to be a part of their family. You'll see." John says, "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do," she says. "I've seen it happen. The police have turned over the things they found in your house. It's not much, but what they found will be yours at the orphanage." We're going to cut to the orphanage. We see John in a room filled with empty bunk beds. We see him look out the window at the other kids playing in the fenced yard. He sighs and turns back to his bunk. We see a small cardboard box sitting there. We see John open the box. He pulls out a half-burnt family photo. He looks it over in his hands, then pulls out a small silver lighter. He clicks it a few times until a flame licks up. He tosses it away in panic, and we see the flame wink out. John leaves it sitting on the floor. Lastly, he pulls out a large red book. It's untouched by the fire. John's hands tremble as he holds it. He sets it down on the bed and steels himself. He opens it and flips through the pages. We see spells and words, strange languages and symbols. It's a book of magic. He finally stops on a brightly colored picture of a spear surrounded by multicolored light. John reads its name aloud. Dawn Spear. We see him read. We see flashes on screen of phrases like resurrect the dead, control reality, manipulation of the living. We see John's eyes light up as he smiles for the first time since his parents died. We see the colorful picture of the Dawn Spear reflected in his eyes. The camera zooms into them until darkness fills the screen. In this blackness, we get the title drop, Justice League Dark, The Dawn Spear. We exit from the darkness and see a small stone house built atop a mountain. Snow whips around the building and wind blows hard. We see text on screen that says 18 years later. We see a woman in a dress appear from thin air in front of the house. We cut to the inside of the home. We see Dr. Mist making a cup of tea. He boils the kettle, then pours hot water into a cup. On a counter, we see a photo of him with a young woman kissing him on the cheek. We see his face. It's hollow and sunken. His eyes are red as if he's been crying. He carries the tea towards a table in the center of the room. As he does so, we see a noose hanging from the rafters. He moves past it and sits at the table. There we see another photo. It's Dr. Mist with the same woman, only she's much older, and he hasn't aged at all. He runs a finger across it. He picks up a bottle of alcohol and pours it into his tea. He takes a sip. Suddenly, there's a knock at his door. Dr. Mist stands up and looks at the door with confusion. He cautiously approaches it. He opens it, and we see Madame Xanadu. She asks, "Do you mind if I come in out of the cold?" Dr. Mist says, "What do you want, Xanadu?" She says, "Just a moment of your time. I have a proposal." Mist says, "Fine." She enters and he shuts the door behind her. Dr. Mist asks, "Do you want any tea?" And Xanadu says, "No, thank you." She picks up the picture on the table. She says, "I was sorry to hear about Sarah. She was a kind soul." Dr. Mist turns to look at her with hate. He says, "Enough empty platitudes. What are you here for?" Xanadu asks, "Have you ever heard of the Dawn Spear?" Dr. Mist says, "Of course. The last artifact made by the wizard King Midas before his death. He claimed it was able to change the fabric of reality." "Why?" Xanadu says, "Because I've had a vision of the future. Something bad is coming. The end of the world, the deaths of billions. At its center, I see the Dawn Spear." Confusion lights across Dr. Mist's face. He says, "Show me." He holds out his hand to her. Xanadu takes it, and her eyes glow white. We see Madame Xanadu and Dr. Mist standing before a pyramid of corpses. There are thousands, maybe millions, piled on top of each other. Across the pile, we see the bodies of the Justice League Dark. Zatanna has a hole plunged into her neck. Blood runs down her front. Dorothy has multiple wounds across her body and is dead. Xanadu has no head, and Shade has been torn into two pieces at the waist. Standing on the top of the pyramid of corpses, a shadowy figure holds the Dawn Spear. It glows with bizarre, swirling, multicolor lights. In an instant, the vision changes. We see people in Metropolis running. Red eyes light up the dark around them. We see Superman chained to the concrete ground, with a chunk of kryptonite jetting from his chest. Blood pools around his body and is boiling as the air superheats. We see the city burn, followed by the world plunging into darkness. We cut back to Dr. Mist's house. Xanadu's eyes stop glowing, and Dr. Mist stumbles back from her. "It's a shame, I suppose," he says, "but I always suspected such a grim fate would be ours. Why have you come to me?" Xanadu says, "I want to change this future. I want to save the world from the coming darkness, and to do it, I will need your help." Dr. Mist says, "The future cannot be changed once it has been glimpsed, Xanadu. It is one of the fundamental laws of magic. I am not fool enough to fall for such a simple trick." Xanadu shakes her head. "I've done it before." Dr. Mist says, "It's impossible." Xanadu says, "I saw a future set in stone, a dark shadow from a twisted dimension destroying the world. I stopped it, and I will stop this too." Dr. Mist asks, "How?" She says, "Simple, by destroying the Dawn Spear before it can be used." Dr. Mist looks at her. There's some logic to her thought. If she were truly able to destroy the Dawn Spear, the future would never come to pass. He says, "And why do you think I care about the end of days? It's not like it will hurt me. Believe me, I've tried to end my own life." He gestures to the noose hanging from the rafter. He says, "I will not die, Xanadu, but I welcome the attempt. Maybe this Dawn Spear and its coming apocalypse will finally end me." Xanadu smiles lightly. She says, "I know your heart well, perhaps better than you. Your eyes betray you, Namo. You will stop it because you care for the humans, and they are the ones who will truly suffer." Dr. Mist looks away. He says, "The Dawn Spear. You really think you can find it?" Xanadu says, "I know I can. I already have the first piece I need." Dr. Mist says, "Fine. I don't believe you can alter the future, but I'll help. I'm not doing anything else anyway. But when this is done, I just want to be left alone. Please." Xanadu says, as you wish. We're going to cut to a hotel room, sort of like a Midwest cheap inn. We see Shade sitting on a bed watching TV. Maybe it's the news or something, or some old TV show, it doesn't matter. He sighs and turns off the TV. As he does, we hear giggling and other whispers. One whisper stands out. It's a female voice. It says, Shade. Shade quickly turns towards the sound. We see Nightshade for only a single frame. She vanishes in the blink of an eye. He pulls on his madness vest. Why are you doing this? Please, I can't go back to the madness. The shapes on the vest continue to move as always. Shade stands and leaves the room. We see him walk across the road to a small diner. He checks his watch and then sits at a table. A hostess walks up to him. He looks at her, and we see it's Nightshade. Shade jumps visibly. When he looks again, it's just a young woman with dark hair. She asks, What's wrong, sweetie? Shade says, It's nothing, just a bit tired. Waitress says, Tell me about it. Long night at work? Shade says, Yeah, you could say that. She asks him, How about a coffee then? Shade says, That actually sounds good. She smiles and leaves him. We see a short man enter the diner. It's the same guy who met with Constantine in the after-credits scene of Suicide Squad 5. He looks around nervously until Shade meets his eyes. The man walks over cautiously and sits at the booth across from him. Shade asks, Do you have it? The short man says, Do you know what I'm risking? If my boss finds out I'm selling this, how do I know you're not one of his? Shade asks, Would it matter at this point? The short man says no. He reaches into his bag and pulls out a large piece of paper. A copy of a strange map is printed on top of it. Shade asks, What is this? The small man says, It's the first piece of the map, as I promised. Shade says, It's a piece of paper. The waitress brings out a cup of coffee and sets it in front of Shade. Both men fall silent. Shade says, Thank you. The waitress says, No problem. Hope that wakes you up. The small man watches her go nervously. He says, Like I told the lady I talked to on the phone, I already sold the original. This is a copy. You knew what you were getting. Shade says, Fine, I'll take it. He tosses him a doggy bag. The man opens it up and looks inside. We see money. The man says, You never saw me. He slides the paper copy of the map over and leaves the table. The waitress comes back, places a check at Shade's table, and then walks behind the counter. Shade picks up the check to look at how much he owes, and sees a phone number with a smiley face. He looks up, and the waitress waves at him. We see Shade conceal a smile. He takes his check and leaves a 20 on the table. He steps outside the bar and approaches the back of the building. We see Zatanna waiting there. She says, What are you smiling about? Shade says, It's nothing. Just an opportunity I never thought I'd have again. Zatanna says, Well, that's good, I guess. Did you get what we came for? Shade says, Yeah, I got it. She nods, then draws a rectangle in the air with her finger. A door appears. She opens it and they enter. We see them arrive in a house with a wooden interior and a warm fireplace. It's the House of Mystery. We see Xanadu and Dr. Mist sitting at a table. Xanadu stands up when she sees them. Did you get it? Shade pulls the piece of paper out of his envelope and slides it across the table. It's only a copy, but it looks real. Dr. Mist asks, What is it? Xanadu says, The first piece of the map needed to reach the Dawn Spear. It will lead us to the other pieces, which will lead us to the spear itself. She examines it. We see text written around the outside edges. Xanadu reads it aloud. Below the last place of a life which was dour, where I will finally be able to play at leisure. That is where thou shalt scour, hidden deep within my greatest countermeasure. Yet be warned, for once you enter, you have but an hour to escape with knowledge of my treasure. Zatanna says, Great, a riddle. I love these. Xanadu says, Below the place of a life which was dour. He's clever. Might has hid it in his grave. Dr. Mist says, Perfect. Where was he buried? Xanadu says, I don't know. I don't know if anyone does. Too long in the past. But we'll have to figure it out. Shade says, I don't think I'm going to be much help here. I'm going to go get some sleep. Xanadu says, All right, Shade. You did well. We follow Shade as he walks up a small set of stairs and enters a room. It's simple, just a bed and a small desk. No decorations hang on the wall. He sits on the corner of his bed and looks at the phone number on the check. He thinks back to the past. We see him sitting at a table on a balcony. It's a restaurant in his home dimension of Meta. The architecture is strange and colorful. He fiddles with one of his pockets. He pulls out a box and opens it. We see a strange ring with a glowing blue gem. He lets his breath out nervously. He quickly hides the ring again. We see Nightshade approach the table and take a seat across from him. It's the Nightshade before the shadow consumed her again, the one Shade fell in love with. Nightshade says, What's with the nice place? Shade says, I don't know. Just thought it might be nice. Nightshade says, it's very nice. I've heard the food here is good. Shade says, best in the city. There's something I wanted to ask you before we ate. Nightshade says, sure. What? Shade says, I like spending time with you. This year I've spent with you, it's been the happiest of my life. I never really had a place before. But here, I feel like I've found it. Nightshade says, I feel the same. Shade says, I don't know where you came from, and honestly I don't care. I love you. He pulls the ring out and asks her, will you marry me? Nightshade says, yes, I will. She hugs him and says, I love you, Shade, into his ear. As the memory fades away, we see the glowing blue ring on Shade's finger, a lone reminder of the love he lost. He looks up, and we see Nightshade standing right in front of him, staring him in the eyes. Her face is rotting into shadowy patches, and her eyes seem more wild than before. There's something sinister about them. She gestures to the check with the number on it. She says, you think you deserve that? Shade says, you are not real. Nightshade says, perhaps. Or maybe my soul is finally free from your infernal blade. Shade says nothing. Nightshade says, I was the last living person you loved, and the only person who ever loved you back. You murdered me. You don't deserve to find happiness. You don't deserve that. She gestures again to the number. Shade says, you were just a manifestation of my madness. You are not real. Shade closes his eyes and sighs. When he opens them, Nightshade is gone. He holds up a hand to his head. His eyes glance back to the number on the check. Maybe she's right. Maybe he is too broken for that. He tears it into two pieces and lets it fall to the floor. We're going to cut to the next morning. We see the entire Justice League Dark assembled. Xanadu says, we found it. Here. She points to a small French town named Namar. I don't know if that's a real place, but who cares? We could call it Escargot. Surrenderville. It doesn't really matter. Somewhere in France. I just made an enemy of the entire French populace. And you know what? Good. That's a good thing. That's right, France. I'm starting beef with the entire country of France. The channel Bjorn Does Movies is beefing with France. It's official. I want to see Bjorn versus France artwork. I like my chances. I'm pretty sure I can get him to surrender within the first round. We'll book a boxing event sometime. Xanadu says, he had his body buried in a local catacomb. I suspect there will be more to this than meets the eye. As the riddle says, it is a countermeasure, and we only have an hour to escape it with the second piece of the map. Dr. Miss asks, how did you find it? Xanadu says, I asked the right questions of the right people. Dr. Miss eyes her, but says nothing. Something suspicious about that answer to him. Shade says, what are we waiting for? We need to find that spear before it's too late. Xanadu says, right you are, Shade. Let's go. We see Zatanna snap her fingers, and a door opens up. It leads to the French town. They exit and find themselves in front of a catacomb entrance. Angels are carved into its front, and stairs descend into darkness. Zatanna says, cozy. Xanadu says, we don't have much of a choice. If I had to guess, the map piece will be right on his body. We only have an hour, and I don't want to know what happens if time runs out. Dr. Miss says, someone else got here first. He points to a set of footprints in the mud leading to the catacombs. Dorothy says, who else could be coming here? Xanadu says, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't change anything. But we have to hurry. Be on your guards. She enters the catacombs. It's a dark tunnel. As she moves her way down, torches begin to light themselves along the way. Skulls are fitted into the walls and seems to follow the passing Justice League Dark members with empty eye sockets. Finally, they empty out into an impossibly large open corridor. The walls are made with bones and seem to spread on an impossibly long distance. It's entirely impossible for this place to exist beneath the town they'd just seen. It's too large. Dr. Miss says, this place has been bewitched. Xanadu says, yes, with powerful magic. Things will not be as they seem. Zatanna looks across the massive room and spots a gilded coffin. In front of it is a pedestal displaying the second piece of the map. Zatanna says, it's there. She takes 2 steps towards it. Suddenly walls appear all around her. The hall begins to twist upwards and she spins until she's upside down, stuck to the floor. The walls begin to slide in place around them, creating a labyrinth. She's turned right side up again, on the floor once more. When she turns around, the Justice League Dark is gone. She's alone in a labyrinth. Zatanna says, stupid! She begins to walk down the tunnel. We see walls shifting and closing behind her. Pathways appear and disappear at random. She explores these tunnels for quite a bit of time, and we see all these different things I'm about to describe. The rooms spin around, leaving her upside down or right side up. from time to time. Staircases are built at impossible angles, either upside down or right side up. They move as she walks on them. Basically, nothing in the maze follows the laws of physics. Get some really cool visuals here, After a little bit of exploring, Zatanna turns a corner and bumps into someone. They both go to the floor, knocked over by each other. She looks up and sees John Constantine standing unsteadily to his feet. A ball of fire appears in his hands. Zatanna says, "John?" Constantine says, "Z?" The fireball in his hand vanishes. Zatanna slaps him without thinking twice. Constantine says, "I deserve that." Zatanna slaps him again. Probably that one too. She tries it again, but he catches her hand. "Enough! What are you doing here, Z?" She pulls her hand free from his. "The same thing as you, I imagine. Looking for the Dawn Spear." John laughs. "And what do you want with it?" Zatanna says, "None of your business." Constantine kind of chuckles to himself. He's trying to think how best to use this. He says, "All right. The way I see it, we're stuck together for a bit. I've been here for nearly 30 minutes. I don't have much time left if this riddle isn't bullocks. It's only the second piece of the map. We don't have to worry about who gets the spear until the third. I say, we get this one together and share it. We can worry about who gets the spear when it comes to that." Zatanna says, "How can I trust you? You're a liar, John." Constantine says, "Honestly, I wouldn't trust me, but we have similar goals and a lack of options." Zatanna sighs. She says, "Fine, but this is temporary." They continue down the hall. They turn a corner and see another person. It's a dark-haired man in a black suit. Constantine says, "You gotta be shitting me." The man notices them. Nick Necro says, "Constantine, you stole my map." Constantine says, "Backward, Z." They quickly turn to run, but a wall has appeared, blocking their path. Nick Necro says, "Nowhere to run, John." Constantine says, "Nicky, mate, let's talk about this. We can work something out." Nick Necro says, "Not this time. You're a dead man, John." They're going to have a magical battle. Also, they shoot energy blasts at each other and block with energy. I'll breeze over this part of the battle. Constantine turns to Zatanna as he fights to beat Necro and says, "A little help?" Zatanna, who's now leaning against the wall, says, "Oh no, I think you've got it." She smiles. Nick moves closer to Constantine. Nick moves in close to Constantine. He grabs his arm and smoke rises. Constantine snarls. He snags a lighter out of his pocket and sends a burst of flames into Nick Necro. The flames force Nick back. Constantine smiles. "You lost your touch, Nicky. You used to be better." Nick forms a purple flaming sword in his hand and runs towards John. But he only seems to be getting further away as he runs. The hall is growing longer. John laughs at his luck. Nick screams. He throws a firebolt at John. It flies through the long hall. Constantine jumps out of the way and it catches the edge of his duster. We can see it singe it slightly. A wall forms between John and Nick and the maze shifts again. Constantine turns to Zatanna. "I don't know how long the maze will hold him. We need to hurry." Zatanna nods and they run down the hall of the catacombs. Behind them, a wall shifts into place as the maze changes again, and a new doorway opens up. Zatanna asks, "Was he someone else you burned?" Constantine says, "My teacher. Guess he did too good of a job." Zatanna says, "What'd you do to him?" Constantine says, "Well, the map piece was his. I paid one of his students to steal it for me. I imagined he wouldn't be too happy about it, but I thought I'd have more time before he found me." The floor twirls, tipping them upside down. They stick to the ceiling as if they were on the floor again. A big hall lined with pillars appears in front of them on the ceiling. The camera turns, making the ceiling the floor. The torches light one by one and reveal the pedestal with the map. We see skeletons littering the ground. Constantine says, "Well, that's a trap if I've ever seen one." Zatanna says, "How do you want to handle it?" Constantine checks his watch. "The fast way." He walks forward without a care in the world. Suddenly, the dead skeletons scattered about the hall begin to stir. They climb to their feet. Each one holds daggers. Constantine says, "Not what I was expecting." He fires an eldritch blast into one of the skeletons. It blows apart. Zatanna says, "At least they die." Zatanna sends red lightning from her hand and destroys 3 skeletons. The room begins to twist in segments. Some of the skeletons are now upside down, running along the ceiling. John forms a flamethrower from his lighter, destroying 2 skeletons. Suddenly, a skeleton leaps down from the ceiling and lands on John. It tries to stab him, but he shakes it off. He pulls a sawed-off shotgun from the inside of his duster and fires. The skeleton disintegrates into ash. This is the holy shotgun. It's only featured in the movie, as far as I'm aware, the Constantine movie. And I'm not 100% a fan of that movie, but I really like the idea of John Constantine carrying a enchanted holy shotgun. That's so goofy
that there was no way I wasn't going to put it in the script. So yeah, we're going to see the holy shotgun a couple of times. I want the design to look less like it does in that movie and more like a traditional sawed-off shotgun with maybe a couple crosses sprawled into the wood. I kind of want it to look like something that John just scrambled together himself and blessed either himself or got some shabby priest to do it. It just sort of fits the unkempt nature of the character, in my opinion. We see Zatanna rip the last two apart with a spell that forces them together, breaking them apart. Constantine says, "Nasty little buggers." He looks towards the podium, which is just in front of them now. We're going to cut to the rest of the Justice League. Dark. We see Shade barely jump away in time as a pit opens up beneath him. A wall opens, revealing a new path forward. Shade says, "I'm over this. How long have we been in here?" Dr. Mist says, 25 minutes, give or take. Dorothy says, "There has to be some way to get out of here, right? It's supposed to be a puzzle." Xanadu says, "I think the lack of logic is the point. This is an endurance test." They move past a hall filled with stone knights guarding long dead tombs. As Dr. Mist passes one, we see it move out from the wall behind him. It moves its sword up and impales Dr. Mist through the chest. It lifts him up on its stone sword and throws him aside. Dorothy screams. Dr. Mist barely reacts. He stands up and we see the wound in his chest close up. 5 more stone knights come stepping out of their coffins, each armed with a shield and a stone sword. Dr. Mist says, "Xanadu, charge me." Xanadu thrusts her hands out and lightning arcs off them. It crashes into Dr. Mist's back. His clothes burn off and we see smoke rising from his burning flesh. When it's done, green mist oozes off his skin. That burns on his back heel. He holds out a hand and a green ball of energy flies out. It crashes into one of the stone golems, destroying it before smashing into a second one. It destroys that one as well. Shade steps forward and his madness vest begins to glow with different shapes and colors. He flicks out a whip of colorful energy and it slices one of the stone golems in two. Dorothy holds out her hand and the cartoon octopus tentacles fly out of it. They constrict one of the stone knights, crumbling into pieces. Xanadu uses telekinetics to pick up one of the fallen stone swords. She throws it towards the last knight, slicing its head off. The rest of its body crumbles to dust. Dr. Mist says, "Well fought." Xanadu says, "We must continue. We are running out of time, and I don't want to know what happens if we don't find the map in time." We're going to cut back to Constantine and Zatanna. The two stand around defeated skeletons. The map lies just in front of them. Constantine spares a look back for Zatanna. Vines grow up from the floor and ensnare her feet. She tries to pull her feet free but can't. She tries to cast a magic spell, but the vines only grow up her body, and her magic falters. Constantine says, "I wouldn't do magic." Zatanna realizes, "This was you? Let me out." Constantine says, "I can't do that. It was a pleasure catching up, Z, but I'll be taking this." He takes the second piece of the map off the pedestal. It magically binds to the piece he already has, forming one single piece of paper. Zatanna says, "John, you bastard, you tricked me." Constantine says, "Sorry, love. I really need this. I'll make it up to you over dinner sometime." Zatanna says, "I'm not your love, you snake. You're just gonna leave me here?" Constantine says, "Don't worry, I'll release you when I'm gone. You'll be fine." Constantine turns to leave, but finds the hall blocked by Shade, Xanadu, Dorothy, and Dr. Mist. The rest of the Justice League Dark has arrived. Constantine says, "Ugh, bloody hell." Xanadu says, "Hand over the map." John turns to run the other way, but the room shifts once more, turning back into the large hall it started as. The map has been taken, and the puzzle solved. We see Nick Necro standing on the opposite end from them, near the entrance, blocking the way out. Nick says, "Constantine!" John looks back and forth between the Justice League Dark and Nick. He sighs. He turns back to Justice League Dark. He moves his hands out in the air, and Zatanna is freed from the tangle of vines. She walks up and snatches the map from Constantine's hands. Constantine says, "Shit. Tell me you have a way out of here." Zatanna says, "Of course." She draws a finger in the air and a door appears. She opens it and the Justice League Dark all rush in, Constantine in tow. She shuts it behind them. They are now safely inside the House of Mysteries. Constantine looks around and says, "This is new. What is it?" Zatanna says, "It's an ancient magical pocket dimension bound to me. It was a hat, but I decided I liked the look of a house better." They move towards the table. Xanadu says, "The map." She holds out a hand, and Zatanna gives it to her. Xanadu takes it and unrolls it. Dorothy asks, "Does it say where the spear is?" And Xanadu says, "No, this map will lead us to the third and final piece needed to find the spear." Constantine says, "Well, does it tell us where to find that?" Zatanna says, "You don't talk." John mimes sealing his lips and throwing away the key. Xanadu says, "It appears to be written in Ultranonic, a dead language belonging to the ancient mages. It will take me a few days to decipher. This task was meant to be one of the mind, it would seem, testing our scholarly knowledge. Dr. Mist says, I am familiar with the dialect. There was a time when it was not so extinct. I can help. Shade says, I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room. His eyes dart to John. Xanadu says, very well, John Constantine. You are after the Dawn Spear. Why? Constantine smiles. Power. The Dawn Spear is the greatest work of magic in the universe. I want it. Xanadu says, well, your motivations are simple at least. Still, I cannot allow you to have it. Constantine says, why not? Plenty of magic in that spear. I'm willing to share if you are. Xanadu says, we do not intend to use it. We are out to destroy it. Constantine says, destroy it? Why the bloody hell would you do that? Xanadu says, because I have glimpsed the future. The spear needs to be destroyed, or it will be the end of all things. If we destroy it, that future will not come to pass. Constantine says, you had a vision. Show me. Xanadu offers him a hand. John takes it. We see the same vision as before. When we see the piles of corpses, John's eyes linger over Zatanna's dead body. He looks at the wound in her neck and her dead eyes. His eyes grow somber. Xanadu says, this is the fate that awaits us all, unless I destroy that spear. Constantine smiles. He says, bloody hell, I thought it would be the Siggies that kill me. But you've convinced me. I'll help you get the spear. Dr. Mist says, and when we do, what then? Constantine says, we destroy it, mate. Like you said. Xanadu says, very well, Constantine. Welcome to the Justice League Dark. Zatanna leaves the table in a huff and walks down the hall. Constantine looks after her and says, if you'll excuse me. He tries to follow her. He manages to catch her outside her room. He says, look, Z, I want to apologize for the way I left things. Zatanna says, you mean the way you left me? I waited for you, John. The least you could have done was told me you were going. I can't believe I didn't see what you were. I won't make the mistake twice. Constantine says, Zatanna, it doesn't have to be like this. Zatanna says, I think it does, John. You may have fooled the others, but I know you better. You'll never change. You'll betray us for even the slightest benefit to yourself. Power is the only thing you ever cared about. Night, John. She enters her room and shuts the door behind her. We see Constantine try to hold up his hand as if he's going to knock, to try to make things right. He pulls his hand away and moves down the hall. He lights up a cigarette with the lighter we saw at the first scene. He mumbles to himself, probably for the best. We're going to cut to Dorothy's room. Dorothy sits on her bed and stares at a plain teddy bear. She says, come on, wake up. When nothing happens, she says, ugh, this is useless. She throws the bear across the room. Why won't it work? She flops back onto her bed and yawns. She says, maybe tomorrow I can bring him back, to herself. We see her close her eyes as sleep takes her. Suddenly, Dorothy wakes up in a strange room. The floors are made of white stone. Torches burn on pillars lining the room. Beyond them, darkness surrounds the room. Swaying chains hang from the ceiling, and a giant glass window overlooks pitch blackness, as if there was something there. On a small table, an old record player sits. The needle drops on its own, and music begins to play. We hear the song Dream a Little Dream of Me, playing from an old vinyl record. It jumps and scratches. The quality of the audio isn't good. Dorothy nervously calls out, hello? A voice booms through the halls, echoing, somehow sinister. It says, welcome. Dorothy takes a step back and steps in something. She looks down. A pool of blood covers the stone behind her. We see a droplet of blood land on her nose. It came from a chain hanging above her, which is coated in red. For the first time, we see blood splatter across the walls behind her. Something happened here. Something bad. Dorothy asks, where am I? The voice booms. We must speak. Vessel of the light. Long have I hoped for this. Seek me. All around her, strange red eyes appear from the shadows beyond the stone pillars. Dorothy wakes up out of breath. She's covered in sweat. We see her quickly get out from her bed and run towards Zatanna's room. She opens the door and shakes Zatanna awake. Zatanna looks confused. She says, Dorothy, did you have a nightmare again? Dorothy says, yes, but it was different this time. There was blood and I think someone was dead there. Zatanna says, no one died, Dorothy. They're just nightmares. It's not real. Dorothy says, yeah, but it doesn't feel fake. It feels like the voice knows me. Zatanna smiles softly. She asks, do you want to sleep in here tonight? Dorothy says, yeah, thank you. She's still only a child after all, I think only 12. I think this is a reasonable response. Dorothy climbs into Zatanna's bed. She's still shaking with fear. Zatanna notices. A frown grows across her face. We hear her mutter out a spell. We see Dorothy's eyes grow calmer, and she slips into sleep. Zatanna helped her fall asleep with a spell. She carefully creeps out of the bed. We see her wander the halls until she reaches the library. She starts to look for a book. She finds what she's looking for. She pulls it off the shelf. We see its cover says, "The Magic of Dreams, a guide to dream invasions and foresight." A voice speaks from behind her. It's Dr. Mist. He says, "A bit late for reading." Zatanna jumps. Dr. Mist says, "Sorry, I didn't mean to frighten you. I was doing the same." He holds up a book. Zatanna says, "It's all right. I just didn't expect anyone else to be up." Dr. Mist says, "I don't sleep. A strange side effect of my condition. I don't really mind. Gives me more time to learn." "What were you in such a hurry to read?" Zatanna says, "It's probably nothing." She blushes, "But little Dorothy's been having this strange dream. A reoccurring nightmare, you know. She's convinced it's real, and I don't know. I thought I'd read about it. I've never dealt with kids before." Dr. Mist says, "I have. Kids have nightmares. With what that little girl has probably been through, I don't think you should be surprised." Zatanna says, "Yeah, you're right. Just a nightmare." She sets the book back onto the shelf, leaving it. She says, "Good night." Dr. Mist says, "It's nice that you care for her. Children are the purest thing in the world. Good night." Zatanna smiles lightly to him, and we follow her as she heads back to her room. She checks on Dorothy. We see a fond smile grow across her face. Dorothy is still fast asleep. Zatanna climbs into the bed and closes her eyes. The camera lingers for a moment before pulling back. It turns to face the closet door. For the slightest moment, we see a pair of skeletal hands and green eyes creeping from the inside. They slip back into the darkness. For those who haven't seen The Suicide Squad, this is one of Dorothy's imaginary friends. It warns her of impending danger, and it just takes the form of a skeleton man who comes out of the closet and tells her that there's danger. She's missed her warning from the skeleton man. We're going to cut to a different library, more of a study. It's a wooden room with a chair overlooking a fire. In it, Nick Necro sits, a drink in his hand. Mind Warp, a younger man sitting across from him, says, "I told you, boss, you shouldn't have gone alone." Nick says, "He made me look like an amateur. When did I let him get so far beyond me?" Mind Warp says, "We'll get him next time. You place an arcane tracker on him. He's not going anywhere without us knowing." Nick shakes his head. "I need more power. That Dawn Spear is mine. I won't let him steal it from me." He turns to look Mind Warp in the eyes. "Leave me." Mind Warp gets up and leaves. Nick stands and pulls on a candlestick. A secret staircase opens up. He heads down into the darkness until he comes to a room made of stone. We see a star painted onto the floor. Candles are lit across the room. We see a man gagged and bound to a chair. We recognize him as the man Shade bought the map off of. At the very back of the room, a demon is trapped in a circle of salt. The demon's name is Nurgile, by the way. It's a DC character, fairly commonly associated with the Justice League Dark. Nurgile says, "Back so soon. Did John Constantine beat you so easily? I gave him his power, you know. I could give it to you too." Nick says, "Fine. I'll do it. Give me power." Nurgile smiles. He's close to winning. "What do I get in exchange? We demons do not give gifts for free. Certainly not to men like you." That comment pisses Nick off. He says, "I'll give you your freedom. I trapped you in that salt circle. Don't forget it." The demon just laughs. He says, "Time is no issue to a demon. I am immortal. I can remain here for your entire lifetime. It makes no difference to me. You'll have to do better." Nick moves across the room towards the bound man. He holds his knife up and says, "I give you the blood of the unworthy, spilled unwillingly." He takes a knife and stabs it into the bound man, tossing him to the floor. Blood forms pools around him. The flames of the candles dance higher. Nurgile says, "Enough perhaps for some power, yet not enough to beat John Constantine. I gave him much." Nick stares the demon down. He slowly removes his shirt. Nick Necro says, "I give you my blood and my soul." Nick takes the knife and carves a star into his chest. Blood runs down his body and coats the floor. Nurgile laughs. This is something that amuses him. He says, "Your sacrifice is accepted. The powers of hell are yours." Nick walks over and kicks the salt circle. The demon walks free from its prison and approaches Nick. It places a single red finger on Nick's head. We see blue fire appear in Nick's eyes. He throws his head back and laughs. His veins grow bright red and become clearer under his skin. His muscles seem to grow stronger. There's something so sinister about the power he's been given. The candle's fire grows up as bright and as tall as it can. Nergile smiles. He says, "Be seeing you." The candle flames all snuff themselves out, leaving the room in darkness. And that's where I'm going to end the first episode. A pretty good beginning to our first act, and setting up a lot of stuff to come. As y'all might be able to tell, this is a fairly large, epic movie. I wanted this to feel more like the scope of a Justice League project. So we've got quite a few things going on, and I think by the end of the movie it'll all come together.
Alright, a pretty interesting first act. Every character has something going on. I have a much smaller cast in this movie, which is wonderful. I get to give every character direct character development and things to do, which is really nice. Going forward, John will be more of a mainstay on the screen time front. He isn't in the script until about the halfway point for narrative reasons, but going forward he will be our main character, and he's going to be getting a lot of the screen time. In fact, he hogs a lot of the screen time. If you guys enjoyed this, go ahead and leave it a like, and maybe think about subscribing or turning on notifications. For sure, though, one way or the other, if you hate my script, leave a comment, let me know why, because I love negative feedback. It allows me to make my writing better. If you love the script and like what I did, again, positive feedback, tell me what you liked. It helps a ton. If you think you know what's going to happen going forward, or generally have some thoughts about where you think the story may be going, or where you think a character's going, or maybe who's going to die in the end, go ahead and let me know below. If you like writing and want either help or a community, I do have a small Discord server where I chat fairly frequently. We have quite a few active chatters there, and if you write a script or a short story or something and you want feedback on it, leave it in the share your stuff section of that Discord, and I will personally give notes. I've done this quite a few times. I can't promise I'll do it in a timely manner, i.e. like don't expect it within an hour, but I usually try to within a week go in there and respond and give people feedback. So if that's something that interests you, you can go there and get advice from an amateur hack like myself. Alright, thank you all for watching. We will be doing the next episode probably in a couple weeks. I don't know what'll be next. Either Deadlands or Harry Potter's finale will be next. Maybe if you have a thought one way or the other which one you want to see first, let me know below. I'll see you all in the next one.